Owning a boat comes with a number of perks, like being able to fling your favorite fishing rod around. And here's another perk. Geico's boat insurance covers your boat and your belongings. And with specialist support from agents that are as passionate about boating as you are, there's so much value that you'll want to high-five someone. But not while you're holding your fishing rod. That's a prized possession. So hold on tight with both hands and keep it covered through boat insurance. Get more with Geico.
This is Wheelbearings. I'm Dan Roth.
And I'm Sam Abu Al-Samad.
So we're recording this the day before Thanksgiving, and with that in mind, we have some traffic-based topics to cover. So we'll start with what we're driving. We'll get to that in just a second. All right. So, Sam, what are you driving this weekend? Are you going over the river and through the woods?
Not planning to attack any woods or rivers this weekend, but I do have a Mazda CX-9 in the driveway, the brand new one, which is, I guess, pretty much the last of the Mazda lineup to get the complete makeover with their Kodo design language. So the previous CX-9 was the last of the cars that were developed under the Ford regime, and so the all new one kind of takes the same kind of design language you've got on all the other current Mazdas, from the 3, the 6, the CX-5, with the more forward-leaning grille, 5-pointed grille, and then it's got a little more subdued variation on the overall design language. And the rationale from Mazda, as they explained it, is that they're looking for a more premium look on that vehicle, and I think it definitely works. It's still got some very nice lines on it. It's got great proportions, and really nicely executed interior, just like we talked about last time around with the Mazda 3. Very well executed, not cluttered at all. Everything is right, pretty much right where you expect it to be. Just really well done overall. And I took it. I had to go down to Ohio, to Central Ohio the other day for an event at Honda's East Liberty assembly plant. So drove it a couple hundred miles and was very impressed with it. For a big 3-row crossover. It's maybe not quite as big as say an Explorer or a Nissan Pathfinder. But it's very roomy inside and got surprisingly good fuel economy. It's been averaging about 25 miles per gallon through a variety of different driving conditions. So
Yeah, the Pathfinder doesn't get anywhere near. Well, I mean, the Pathfinder can do pretty well actually for its size, but the Explorer definitely doesn't get anywhere near that in terms of fuel economy. And both of those, drive like crap in my opinion. So how does the Mazda drive? Does it drive like a Mazda?
yeah, it drives like a Mazda. I mean, obviously, you get a bigger, heavier vehicle like that. It's not going to be as nimble as say a 3 or even a 6 or a CX-5, but it's remarkably composed. It's very quiet on the road. Very little wind noise. Just a really impressive vehicle overall. The one I've got is the signature model, which is the top trim level. It's got really nice leather interior. All the features. It's got adaptive cruise control and lane keeping. The lane keeping system, it doesn't do so much, in terms of trying to keep you in the lane. One of the things I do when I try these systems out, is when there's no one else around, I will kind of try to let it drift a little bit and see how it responds, in order to see if it can really keep if it's more of a lane centering system or just something that gives you alerts. And this is, it'll give you a little bit of a nudge back towards the middle of the lane if if it starts to drift out. But it's more just about giving you the alerts. And what it does is it vibrates the steering wheel, which is my preferred method. So it's not as annoying as the audible alerts. So other than that, it works really well. Very impressive.
Yeah, and in terms of price, like first of all, they put a bunch of standard features on the CX-9. I know that you've got the sort of the highest trim level, but Even the standard one has like LED headlights and stuff. What's yours priced at?
This one is pretty much maxed out at about 45,000 sticker, and that's including the delivery charge. The base trim level, front wheel drive, I think starts at a little over 31, which it's right in the ballpark with most of the other vehicles in the segment. It's not the cheapest, but it's not the most expensive either. So it's pretty comparable. And on this one, the signature edition, it's got Mazda's 2.5 liter Skyactiv turbo, so it's about 250 horsepower. This one's the CX-9 is about between 300 and 500 pounds lighter than an Explorer. So even though you can get the Explorer Sport with the 3.5 liter EcoBoost that has quite a bit more power and torque, overall performance, this one's not going to accelerate quite as hard as the Explorer Sport, but it's got more than adequate performance for a vehicle of its size.
Yeah, that was my other thought. It's a big vehicle, and 2.5 liters is a small engine. But then again, we're starting to see that shift toward forced induction four cylinders. Volvo's doing it with the XC90, and pretty much all their range actually has that 2 liter that's either turbocharged and supercharged, or paired with a hybrid drivetrain as well. So it didn't feel like it ran out of breath. It felt like it was able to keep up with the weight and what you were asking it to do.
Yeah, absolutely. It never had any issues with merging onto highways or things like that. Um, it never seemed to be struggling. It's got more than enough torque, plenty of low end torque. It's responsive enough. Like I said, it's compared to an Explorer Sport. The Sport's gonna pull away from it in a drag race, but who drag races these kinds of
Right.
things anyway?
Yeah, the teenage kids that are out
Yeah.
with mom's car.
Right. So, if you've got a big boat that you need to tow or something like that, it's probably not going to have, enough grunt, to tow, anything over about 2,500 to maybe 3,000 pounds tops. It's probably going to run out of steam there. But, as an average, family commuter vehicle, it's fine, and like I said, it's been averaging about 25 miles per gallon, a little closer to 20 in the city. So it's quite respectable.
Yeah, that's pretty good, especially
Still
for.
choose a minivan over this if I had young kids. But in general, I would choose a minivan over an SUV of any kind.
Yeah,
Uh, but that's just me.
that's you. I mean, there's that minivan stigma, and then there's also the fact that what do you think a minivan equipped that way would cost?
Let's see. The Pacifica I had a few weeks ago was in the same ballpark. So, pricing. It's not like you're going to save money going one way or the other. It's more just a matter of preference. Design. What type of vehicle you prefer. You know, for me, like I said, I remember what it was like. Loading
Yeah.
kids into the car when they were young. And the times when I got to drive minivans, it was far more convenient, because they're lower to the ground. It's easier to reach in and get them buckled into booster seats and things like that. And especially with the big sliding doors on the side of a minivan, it's just so much less hassle.
Oh yeah,
But
yeah.
that unfortunately, the market doesn't doesn't agree with my logical assessment of the situation, and they prefer SUVs. So if you're going to go that direction, this is not a bad choice at all.
Yeah, I mean, and minivans, like, yeah, nothing really beats a minivan. They're about the most efficient use of space. The whole side of the thing opens up, but they've gotten expensive, and that was my thinking. Was the last time I looked and priced minivans out, I was like, wow, these are priced like some premium vehicles, and that's fine because they're equipped that way as well. But it just seems like you said, the practical loses out to the fashion conscious, I guess, to a certain degree.
Yeah, I mean, there is one other factor in there as well. Is you do sit a little bit higher in a crossover or an SUV, and some people like that extra height. Although, in a minivan, you do tend to sit more upright than you do in a car. So it's not like you're gaining a whole lot going from the minivan to an SUV. Um, but you do gain a little bit in terms of that height. Some people like to be able to see around. Of course, if everybody's driving SUVs, then you really don't have an advantage anymore. But
Right. That's just what it is. And so Mazda thinks they're going to sell 50,000 of these things a year. What do you think? Do you think that they're on track for that, or is that really ambitious?
Uh, I think it's probably a little ambitious. I haven't actually looked at the sales figures lately on that one. Um, like compared to sales of the top sellers in the segment, like the Explorer and the Highlander and some of those other vehicles, 50,000 is a pretty modest goal. So I think it's probably doable.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny. Like, I realized when I asked the question too, like, do you think that's ambitious? I mean, I don't think they're going to introduce a new car and be like, yeah, we totally just want to continue with our like mediocre results here.
Right.
Uh,
I mean, the previous CX-9 was also getting pretty long in the tooth. I mean, it was around for better close to a decade.
yeah, I mean, it was an edge.
About 2006 or seven.
Yeah.
So it was around for a long time, and it was definitely looking pretty dated by the time it finally came to market.
The funny thing about the first CX-9 was that it felt different enough from the Edge that it was just that much more satisfying.
Mhm.
In some way, I'm not sure whether that was just sort of perception or reality. I much preferred it to the Edge, which is weird because it was really just a 3-row Edge. But um, yeah, I mean, this one seems poised to do just that much better in terms of being pleasing to drive. It's an all new architecture. I mean, it does look fantastic, and it's outfitted
Yeah,
nicely.
it's definitely one of the best looking vehicles in the segment. For midsize to larger crossovers, this is a handsome looking vehicle, and especially in the dark gray color that this one is in, it definitely looks good. I'm just looking at the October sales report from Mazda, and they sold 1,800 of them in October, which is up 24% from the year before.
Yeah, I would expect that it's going to jump because it's a new model, and they've got
Right.
something to push.
They're still ramping up. They've only been out for a few months now, so I think once people get a look at this thing, they'll probably start to gain some more traction. So I think it's definitely worthy of consideration against the competition, just based on the way it looks and the way it's equipped and the way it drives. I think people would be doing themselves a disservice if they don't give this car serious consideration.
Yeah, well, Mazda overall, it looks like they're selling roughly 1 million vehicles in the U.S. per year, maybe something like
No,
that.
no. Through October, they sold about 250,000.
Okay, why am I looking at a? I'm looking at a sales and production results for September 2016.
I think
Oh,
that might be global.
they've got domestic production, overseas production, and global production. So global production of passenger vehicles from January to September 2016 was 1.1 million. I don't know. Either way, they're up.
Yeah, yeah. I think that sounds about right. I think they're somewhere a little shy of 1.5 million sales globally, and about 250. So far about 250,000 through October of this year in the U.S.
Okay. All right. I'm clearly not interpreting the results that well. Or I'm just looking at the wrong chart. Anyway,
You've got an SUV too.
yeah, I was gonna say let's just move on so I can avoid further embarrassment. I've got the Nissan Rogue Hybrid, which is it's interesting. I was curious to try it out because it seems like such a natural place to create a hybrid. It's a hot segment that's sort of compact, or I guess I don't know, is it compact or
Yeah,
mid-size?
that's considered a compact crossover, or compact SUV.
It's kind of big for a crossover, like for a
Yeah,
compact.
well, I mean, everything keeps getting bigger and bigger, but it's in fact the current Rogue is bigger than the original Murano, which was a midsize.
Wow. I didn't even think of that. The Murano was always one of those vehicles that was very stylish. It was very comfortable. It was the Maxima of crossovers, like stylish,
Yeah.
comfortable, completely space inefficient, much smaller inside than it looked. Uh,
Well, and the thing about the Murano, from some research I was doing recently, turns out that the Murano is not even classified as an SUV in Nissan's lineup. Like according to the EPA, from their certification stuff, Um, the Murano is actually classed as a mid-sized station wagon,
Huh.
whereas the Rogue and the Pathfinder are classed as small SUVs.
That's so weird. The Murano is a terrible mid-sized station wagon. It's a wonderful niche crossover for sure, though. I always
Yeah.
like the Murano. And, so getting back to the Rogue, actually, for 2017, the hybrid is new. And I like the Rogue and I like fuel economy, but this one just doesn't feel fully baked. Some of the choices are kind of strange. The steering gets really heavy on the highway. There's not a whole lot of feel in it. So it was to the point where there's a long sweeping curve in part of my commute, and I was like, what the hell is going on here? Like, I gotta put some muscle into this. Not that I mind, putting that kind of muscle into like a manual steering rack on something like a Lotus or something like that would be different, but this is just a regular crossover. Like, this is a family car. It's not supposed to be like that.
That's kind of odd because the last time I had a Rogue about almost 2 years ago now, it didn't have that kind of behavior. So I wonder if it's something that they've done differently for, they just did a refresh for the 2017 models when they added the hybrid as well. So I wonder if they've changed that steering calibration quite a bit.
I don't know. And I should say I've only had it since yesterday, so I haven't had a chance to sort of really fully play around with the all the settings. It may be that there's something there
They have
that's.
some different drive modes, like a sport mode versus a eco mode and a comfort mode.
I think there's an eco mode. I'm not sure. Because it's also pretty highly equipped. So we'll see. I'll take a look at it. Overall, the power's good. The integration of the hybrid, when it switches and stuff, it could be a little better, a little smoother. It's not terrible, but it's certainly not the class of the field. It does seem like this time around, instead of licensing a Toyota hybrid system, Nissan has developed their own. So they've got 2 clutches between the electric motor and the engine. So it seems like the way they've gotten around some of that torque split device stuff is they've developed their own way of clutching both powertrains or both power units to the transmission in some way. So it's interesting. I want to dig into the details of it a little more. I'll have a little bit more to say about it in that sense next week. But it's decent to drive.
Yeah, I think that they actually haven't licensed the Toyota system since the original Altima hybrid, which was built from I think about 2006 through about 2009. Ever since then, they actually have had their own hybrid. They use a similar architecture for both their front wheel drive and also for the rear wheel drive Infinity systems that they have on the Q50 and the Q70.
Okay, see, I thought those were distinct, kind of different, just because their architecture is so different.
Yeah, well, I mean, the Infinities are rear wheel drive, but it's a similar basic system with the electric motor sitting in between the engine and transmission, and then a couple of clutches in there to decouple things and allow it to run on electricity. So I think that this is similar to what they previously had on the Pathfinder for the last few years, and they discontinued the Pathfinder hybrid. And that one, the Pathfinder hybrid, didn't get very good reviews because they actually used a surprisingly small battery on it, and it actually didn't really provide a whole lot of benefit in terms of fuel economy on that vehicle. So this time they went with a considerably larger battery. It's about 1.5 kilowatt hours, like most other hybrids. So I was curious to see how it drives compared to what they did on the Pathfinder.
Yeah, it's been so long since I had a Pathfinder hybrid. I couldn't tell you. I'm pretty sure I drove one of those. I've driven Pathfinders. I'm not enamored of the way even just the regular gas Pathfinder drives, as we covered earlier. But overall, the Rogue has always driven pretty well. Even the original Rogue. I liked the way it drove. So this generation is better than that, and this one in particular, it's not a bad vehicle to drive. So I'll crawl on it, on top, below, throughout, and see what I can find out about it, and I'll have more consistent driving feedback for next time. But overall, I think if you're looking in this segment, it's kind of unique because it is a crossover of this size that is a hybrid, but that's really its only sort of redeeming quality. You're much better off with the gas model. Otherwise, it's just a more pleasing overall vehicle.
Yeah, and one of the things that's unique about Nissan is almost all of their front wheel drive vehicles now, that the ones that don't have manual transmissions use a CVT that they developed in house, their Xtronic CVT, and most people really don't like CVTs. They don't like the way they drive very often. But Nissan has done a surprisingly good job in terms of calibrating their CVT to make it feel more natural, more like a conventional transmission. They program it with discrete ratio steps, so that it behaves the way people traditionally expect a transmission to behave, or the combination of the engine and transmission. So they're avoiding what they call the motor boating effect.
Right.
When you drive a boat on the water, you rev up the engine, and the engine runs fairly constantly while the boat accelerates up to speed. And with most CVTs, the way they're programmed, the way they're calibrated, the CVT is calibrated to get the engine up to either to its peak torque for maximum acceleration, or to keep it at its peak efficiency speed, and then just continuously vary the ratio between the engine and the wheels to keep that engine speed constant for maximum efficiency or maximum torque. And most consumers really don't like the way that feels, and I I don't blame them. I don't like the way it sounds. It just sounds unnatural.
Well, it feels like the clutch is slipping, you know?
Yeah, I mean, you've got this constant drone. There's constant sound from the engine even as the car accelerates, and I think over time people might get accustomed to it, but it just doesn't sound right. And so Nissan calibrates theirs a little differently. So it uses smaller steps, but it behaves more like a conventional transmission, a step ratio transmission.
Yeah, and I did notice that yesterday, accelerating, up an on ramp, it would rev up to red line. It would go to 6,000, then it would drop back again, and it did that several times. So I was sort of like, oh, I guess they want you to feel like it's got discrete steps in it,
Yeah,
like an
and that's
automatic.
exactly what they're doing.
I mean, is there actually any other benefit other than psychological there? I think actually that it would make for a quicker acceleration time if it didn't do that.
Um, it could, I think, it depends on the ratios they're using. I mean, what they do is they tend to keep it, within a fairly narrow band of engine speeds. So it's a narrower band of speeds than what you would get with a typical step ratio transmission. But it's just enough variability in the engine speed sound that it sounds more natural. So you get the best of both worlds is what they're trying to achieve: the maximum efficiency or acceleration, as well as a more pleasing experience when you drive it.
Yeah, so it just kind of notches the ratio up a little bit, almost like a close ratio manual, where you sit there between the beginning and end of peak torque, on that bell curve, like the dyno plot, so it just sort of goes back and forth. So each shift puts you, right back down in the meat of the power band. You climb out of it, right back down, climb out of it again. So I don't know. It's an interesting way of doing it for sure. So we'll have more to say next time around. And
Look forward to hearing your thoughts on the hybrid system in that next time.
yeah, and so today, since it's since the last day before Thanksgiving of 2016, traffic comes to mind, and so a topic that's really sort of dear to everybody's mind right now is let the damn car drive itself. Wouldn't that be wonderful? And you actually just posted something on the Navigant blog about GM Super Cruise, and we know when it's coming, which is not as soon as it was promised. But just today, there's also been renewed chatter about requiring automakers to put an airplane mode like function to lock out phones while they're in the cars, and GM has assumed drivers using Super Cruise are going to get distracted because, I mean, let's face it, you are.
Yeah, I mean, based on the experience we've seen with other brands, most notably Tesla, but with any brand that has started to deploy these semi-autonomous systems, these more advanced driver assist systems that control multiple functions at one time, drivers do get distracted. They don't continue to pay attention, And so realizing that, GM, decided to delay the launch of Super Cruise a bit, and do some extra things in there to try to make sure that, to try and ensure the safety of the system. And only time will tell how effective it is. But one of the things that I already learned about several months ago from some discussions with GM is that they'll they'll have a more aggressive driver monitoring system in the vehicle. So when you use Super Cruise, Super Cruise is what's known as a level 2 autonomous system. So the Society of Automotive Engineers has these different levels of automation that have been defined, and pretty much everybody is now using the SAE definitions for automation. So level 0 is a vehicle that has no automation. You do all the driving manually. Level 1 is systems like what we typically have on the road today, with where you've got adaptive cruise control that maintains the speed and maintains the distance to the car ahead of you, or you have lane keeping systems that try to keep you from drifting out of the lane. But each of these functions function individually, independently of each other. When you get to level 2, you're talking now about systems that can control multiple functions. So it can control steering and acceleration and braking. So that's what Tesla Autopilot does. Volvo's Pilot Assist system does that. Mercedes-Benz has their Drive Pilot. So all of these systems, function in a similar manner, not necessarily all to the same degree of capability. Some are better than others, and I think it's generally agreed that Tesla's Autopilot, of the systems that are on the market today, is probably the best in terms of providing smooth functionality. But it's still far from perfect, and it's by no means a fully autonomous vehicle by any stretch. So Super Cruise is going to be similar to that, and it will allow drivers to do fully hands-off operation. So you won't have to keep your hands on the wheel when you're using Super Cruise. But in exchange for that, what GM's done a couple of things. They geofence the system. So basically, before you can enable Super Cruise, it checks where you are on the map to make sure that you're only on limited access highways. So you can't use Super Cruise in the city, where you're going to be hitting intersections, and the system is not capable of handling those kinds of situations. So basically, highway driving is the only place where it can work. And then they're also putting driver monitoring in there. And they haven't given details on exactly how they're going to be monitoring the driver, but they'll be keeping an eye on the driver to make sure that they're still watching the road and ready to take over if the Super Cruise is not able to continue operating. And if the system determines that the driver can't or isn't paying attention, then it will actually slow down the vehicle and bring it to a safe stop at the side of the road if the driver doesn't respond to the alerts to stay attentive. And then the most recent thing that I learned last week at the LA Auto Show was that they're also starting to put in some of the redundancy that's going to have to be part of fully autonomous vehicles when we get to that point. And so one of the features that they've got in there on the CT6 that's available that you can buy now on the active chassis package, one of the features they have in there is rear wheel steering that gives you more aggressive steering at low speeds for easier maneuvering in parking lots, and then increases the stability at higher speeds on the highway. And what they're doing is that system will be included as part of the Super Cruise package, so that if you have any kind of failure in the main front steering system, whether it's the electric assist motor or a steering gear malfunction or anything like that, the rear wheel steering will be able to come in and actually help to steer the vehicle to a safe stop at the side of the road.
Yeah, so overall, it seems like GM has really picked up the ball and run with it in terms of making a system that's very well thought out and very well engineered to, I don't want to say protect us from ourselves, but just really think of those contingencies and put in place ways for the system to adapt to the human variable, the unpredictability of humans, and not just give us all the control and be like, here it is, use it and be responsible, nod, nudge, wink, wink, and and off we go. Like they're putting considerable effort into making this system something that can cope with people.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think we're gonna see the same thing happening from all the other manufacturers going forward as well. They're going to be factoring it, taking into account the human factor and all of this stuff. Um, and with GM, is certainly in the last few years they've gotten burned on some safety issues. Certainly the whole ignition switch debacle of a couple of years ago, and there's been various other issues that have come up. And under Mary Barra's leadership as CEO, she and Mark Royce, who's in charge of product development, have definitely taken a more aggressive stance on making sure that they address safety issues, or at least trying to address the safety issues before the cars go into production. So only time will tell how effective that is, but they certainly seem to be doing the right things going forward. And they do ultimately want to get to fully autonomous driving, and I think they and everyone else increasingly understand that before we get there, with these interim steps, we've got to make sure that we do these interim automation systems correctly, and do them safely, so that we don't destroy consumer confidence in the technology before we get to the point where we can do fully autonomous systems.
Yeah, well, there's a couple things that go on there too. I mean, I think that GM has the challenge of consumer confidence in GM, not
Right.
just the consumer confidence in the technology. I think that it has a lot more cachet when it's the Tesla system, whether or not it has the proper safeguards in place, versus GM. Although GM has the budgetary might to really come to market with a much more fully realized system, GM also has those management issues that have created a culture, or in the past they created a culture of ass covering that
Yeah.
that
No,
that,
you're
that
absolutely right. I mean, like I said, they have made some serious mistakes in the past, and they're trying to, at least from the leadership level at the company, they are making a serious effort to try not to repeat those mistakes.
Yeah, I mean, and because to me, looking on the outside a little bit, the mistakes weren't the engineering. Like GM has world class engineering. The issues were the actions that maybe some of those engineering staff folks took because of management. It's like two different behaviors. The engineering is solid, and then there was a move that was made. Like I'm thinking of the ignition switch thing in particular. Like they backed off some of the rigor of that spec to solve a problem in a way that didn't get anybody in trouble, so like you got to solve that. Solve that, like people being afraid from their jobs, covering stuff up. But like I'm taking the podcast in the wrong direction, so we'll come back. Because I really do believe that GM is invested in making this stuff work. I mean, I'm sure that they, like Ford and like other automakers, see this is the future of the industry, whether we like it or not. We need to have solutions ready for this and have thought of it. And however the technology gets adopted, we need to be able to be that much further down the road. Where do you think, though, GM bringing sort of its full wherewithal to it leaves somebody like Tesla that's been very disruptive, and they have a good system right now, but where does GM fully getting in the game put them?
I think one of the advantages that Tesla has is that they are able to respond very quickly when issues do come up. They have over-the-air update capability that they've done, and they've used that to provide functional and safety updates to their vehicles that are in the field. So that's certainly a big advantage they have, and that they have the ability and willingness to move quickly, when problems are recognized. So that's a good thing. I think where what probably what they I mean what personally what I would like to see them do is maybe slow down just a little bit in terms of deploying some of the technologies to customers, to make sure that they're try to do a little more testing in-house before they let their customers become beta testers of the technology, because I frankly have never really thought that that was a good idea, to especially for safety critical technologies like this. It's one thing to let your customers be beta testers for infotainment systems, which we'll talk a bit more about in a few minutes, but for safety critical systems, I have never believed that that was a wise idea. So I'd like to see them, maybe, do more testing in house before they deliver it to customers, and then, you know, kind of think out, spend more time working on these edge cases, and make sure that they get the edge cases resolved, and have contingencies in place to deal with that before they ship the product.
Yeah, I wonder if that's. I'm sure it has something to do with the fact that it's sort of like the software development mindset. Tesla's sort of born out of that realm, where it's design, ship, test, and
Yeah,
that.
the whole idea of shipping a minimally viable product.
Right.
And I have no issue with that in principle. I think the problem is defining what is minimally viable for a software, for a mobile phone application versus what's the minimal level of viability for a car,
Well,
especially for the safety critical system on a car.
yeah, and even being an end user for some of that stuff, I've used Avid stuff for a long time. I've used Adobe stuff for a long time, and they're in good places now, but there were definitely years and just several year periods where the things were just, they were full of bugs, they weren't reliable, and the model was, the answer you'd get was like, well, that's kind of a rare problem. Like, I don't care if it's a rare problem, it's what I'm doing and it's how I need to work. So
It's the problem I'm having today.
right.
Trying to do the job, where I make my living.
Right.
If it doesn't work, then I don't get paid.
Right, I switched platforms. I mean,
Yeah.
that's the way that happens. And so, like, you don't have that luxury when you've invested in a car. You can't switch platforms while you're driving.
Well, yeah, and the other thing is, as I said, there's a difference between a product that you're using, for video editing,
Right.
or whatever it might be, a software product. If it crashes, it's not going to kill you. It's gonna annoy you, and it might cause you a lot of headaches, but it's not going to kill you.
Right.
A car is a completely different animal, and it can kill you and kill others around you, kill innocent bystanders. So you need to keep that in mind before you ship this kind of stuff. And that goes for every manufacturer. And as we get into more, higher levels of automation on these vehicles, we really need to keep that, focus on that, before we ship products.
I just want them to be able to detect my level 0 car and stay the hell away from it.
Crown
That's
Vic.
yeah, that's exactly what I want. The Crown Vic I can understand. I can bolt stuff to that to make it improved. I don't need to add software. Boy, I really sound like a luddite right now, and I'm not. So anyway, let's stay on the software tip. Let's talk about infotainment a little bit, because last week, and it dovetails nicely with this the autonomy conversation. My thought last week was the lower end of infotainment. Automakers would be wise to seed that to Android Auto or Apple CarPlay, because it just costs so much to develop those systems. And you had a different take on that, and for different reasons. So you said you wanted to talk more about it, and talk more about it on this episode. So let's jump to that.
Yeah. So infotainment, has been, for at least for the last decade, has been a real problem for manufacturers. Traditionally, car makers, when they sell a car, they want to have their own unique user experience. So when you buy a Ford, or you buy a Mercedes Benz, or you buy a Honda, the manufacturers, when you get in that car, they want you to know this is what you're driving. You're not driving a Google product or an Apple product. You're driving a Honda, or a BMW, or whatever it might be. So they all want to have their own unique look and feel to their vehicles. And that as we've gone from old school AM/FM radios and CD players and tape decks, in the case of probably your Crown Vic, to more modern systems, that include telematics and navigation, and the ability to interface with your mobile devices. We've seen that these are companies that are, how shall we say, not very well experienced with doing software user interfaces.
Yeah.
And to put it on honestly, put it bluntly, in fact, almost all manufacturers have done a pretty poor job in terms of designing their user interfaces and developing the user experience. And those are kind of two different but related things. User interface is the visual aspect of what you see and interact with in a system. Whether it's an infotainment system in a car or your phone or your computer or whatever, and then user experience is kind of a superset of that. How reliable is it? How fast? How responsive is it? So there's the look, and there's a look and feel part of it, and then going beyond that, how well does it behave? And a classic example of where both user experience and user interface kind of fell flat was when Ford introduced My Ford Touch in 2010. Their second generation of their sync system. Um, they had a lot of issues with it. The system was underpowered. The software was not very reliable. It crashed a lot. The UI, the user interface, was not very good either. It had small touch targets that were hard to hit. When you're driving. And they've learned from that. Their latest Sync Generation 3 is vastly improved. It's got a much better UI that's easier to use, and then the hardware that it runs on is also a lot better. It's faster, better performing and more responsive. So they've done all the right things, but the key there is still that they want to have their own unique look and feel that you get into it and say, oh yeah, okay, I'm driving a Ford. And so for that, some manufacturers have been reluctant to adopt the Apple CarPlay and Android Auto systems that those two companies have developed that give you a common interface that is tied to whichever phone platform you're using and looks the same, in every different vehicle manufacturer. So manufacturers, don't want to do that because they don't want to lose that control. But at the same time, users like having that consistent experience with the phone that they use all the time. So you've got this two things at odds with each other. And some manufacturers like Toyota have said that they're not going to adopt Android Auto or CarPlay.
Well, that's I mean,
with their own system.
That's unfortunate because instead of getting in the car and going, oh yeah, great, I'm in a Ford product because the system is familiar and easy to use, or I'm in a Toyota because I like the system. You groan. You're like, oh crap, I'm in a Toyota. Like Toyota's system is not good. It's only marginally passable in my opinion, and Tune is just not where it's at. And by integrate, they're sort of being arrogant to a certain degree. I think like don't try to reinvent the wheel. Like you all use round wheels with black tires, like because they work. You might want to consider that consistent. Like the easier you make it for a user to interact with your car, the better off you are. The more they're going to focus on the other aspects of the experience that are really nice, the materials, the design, the seat comfort, versus the like goddamn frustrating infotainment system.
I don't disagree with you at all on any of what you just said. But I've had the opportunity to try out both CarPlay and Android Auto in vehicles from a number of different manufacturers now over the last year and a half or so, and even an aftermarket system from Pioneer. And in general, I very much like those systems, particularly Android Auto. I prefer that over CarPlay, but I'm also an Android user. But I think one thing I've come to realize over the last year or so as well. Well, first of all, one of the things that makes those systems superior to the built-in infotainment systems is the fact that they're cloud connected. So their voice recognition systems are much better than the embedded systems because they have the capability to for an embedded system that's built into the car, you have very limited processing power, very limited storage, for a number of reasons, for cost and because these systems are often they take several years to develop, and so they don't get updated as frequently. So when you use voice recognition that's built into the car, it tends to have a very limited vocabulary because what they're trying to do is by keeping the number of words that it's trying to recognize more limited, they can increase the probability that it will recognize those words consistently in the car environment. Because the car environment, when you're driving, it's a tough environment for something like that to work in, because you've got a lot of ambient noise and everything. And so it's hard for voice recognition to work in that under the best of circumstances. So the combination of limited processing power and the bad environment means that they'll use these limited vocabularies. When you use your phone, because it can send whatever your voice request was up to the cloud to do the recognition, it can do much more reliable recognition and get closer to natural language recognition.
Right.
But of course, that also depends on you having a connection to the cloud. And as I experienced this week when I drove to Central Ohio, that's far from guaranteed. There's, it seems like all the cell phone companies have pretty much ignored Central Ohio as far as providing coverage. And in a large swath of that area, I was getting 0 bars, and I use T-Mobile. I was getting 0 bars, but somebody else that I was there with had Verizon, which is generally considered to be the best. They also had 0 bars. So it's not just one company. There's large parts of the country where you can't get a cell connection. So you need to have at least some degree, in order for us to use a lot of these capabilities that we want to have in cars, at least some portion of that needs to be built into the car. You can't rely on having a connection. And then, as we go forward, as we get into all the automation systems, those systems are also going to require, in order for a car to navigate itself from one place to another, it needs to have the map data built into the car. You can't rely on having a cloud connection to Google Maps or Apple Maps, and especially, someday when we get to the point where we've got autonomous on-demand taxis running around cities, those vehicles are not necessarily going to have a phone built in. They need to have built-in maps. So some of the functionalities, some of the really cool functionality you get out of Android Auto and CarPlay today, like Google Maps or Apple Maps, and the media streaming, right now we can only get those by using those systems. But eventually those maps are going to have to be embedded in the vehicles anyway.
Wait, embedded, like my Jeep has the map data. Like, I download the map data into the system and it has 10 gig worth of storage. Is that what you mean, or is it something different?
Yeah, I mean that's the starting point. So you need to have a base level set of maps that are present in the vehicle all the time, so it can't rely on being able to load live maps from Google's servers. It has to have a certain minimum level as a starting point. So if you're going to summon your car to come and get you, it can use its sensors to look at what's around it in real time. But without the map data in the car, how's it going to know where to go?
Yeah,
It needs to know. It needs the maps built in order to be able to get from one place to another to pick you up.
yeah. No, I get that. That makes sense. I didn't realize that was still kind of an issue. I thought they had solved that with just like put a hard drive in there and.
Well, yeah, I mean, and that's what they're going to do. So I mean, what we're going to see, over the next 5 to 10 years, pretty much we'll probably see pretty much all cars equipped with navigation built in. And also the navigation systems are getting more sophisticated as well. It's not, we started off with basically just flat 2D maps, akin to what we used to have with paper maps. They were just digitized.
Which is still the way I switch the displays. I don't like the ones that show me the horizon in 3D. Like, no, I can't see far enough.
Yeah, I mean, and that's a UI issue, and you can set that any way you want. But the other thing that we're starting to see now is they're starting to put 3D maps in cars with topographical data. So now the map has information about when you're climbing a grade, when you're climbing a hill, and when you're going downhill, and where the crest of the hill is. And so you've got companies like Mercedes-Benz was the first to do it on the S-Class plug-in hybrid, and now Hyundai is doing it on their new Ioniq, on their hybrid and plug-in hybrid and battery electric cars. Where they're doing what's known as predictive navigation. So they're actually using the navigation data as an input to the powertrain control. So
Yeah.
as you climb a hill, in the past, say with a Prius, for example, as you're climbing a hill, if you want to maintain speed going up that hill, as the battery gets down to a certain level, it's going to have to turn the engine on in order to maintain your speed going up the hill. But if you have that navigation data as an input into your powertrain control, and it knows, okay, I'm only a couple of 100 meters from the crest of this hill, and if I just run down the battery a little bit further, I can stay on battery, keep the engine off, or keep a couple of cylinders deactivated, and then I know I'm going to be hitting the crest of that hill and going downhill after that, and then I can recover it. So I can drain the battery a little bit lower than I normally would, because I know I'm going to get that energy back on the other side of the hill. So it can improve your fuel efficiency. And so, they're starting to do things like that and do things like eco routing. So all these things are being, you're going to have the maps built in. So the need for something like Android Auto or CarPlay is going to become less going forward.
Yeah, although, it just makes me wonder, like, how do we get to a point where, like, deciding what goes in the system and what is cloud based too? Because it seems like, one of the big things about OnStar that was cool was that, because the antenna is mounted on the roof, you get gain that way because you don't have this giant attenuator that you're holding the phone to, right? Which is your human head. So you get, double or triple the power, which is, 6 to 9 dB of gain back out of that antenna. So maybe if the cars are using a cloud connection, because that's coming, do we have to actually embed all that stuff, or is it, embed what it needs, and then as it goes through its day, it can pull what it needs out of the cloud, and we can have a reliable, solid cloud connection? I mean, I guess that there are pockets where you're just not going to have any coverage, and then how do we build the cars so that they can fall back to not having that connection? Like, think of your laptop, right? If your laptop loses Wi-Fi, it's pretty much a useless box. Like, you don't want your car to get that way. Well, I mean, yes and no, right? Like, most of the things that people do on their laptop, if you're not in some kind of Word document or, deep in some application, you lose some functionality. We want to make sure that our cars don't get to that point, I guess, where we're relying on stuff that's not always going to be there. And what do we do? What are we doing to drivers? Like, I feel like, just the same as that conversation about the cruise control systems where we're relying on it. We're going to train a whole generation of drivers to let the car do it. Just like now, we have a whole generation, 2 generations really, that can't drive manual.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. To the first part of your question.
Yeah, sorry, I rambled.
There's going to need to be a certain level of functionality that is built into the car that doesn't rely on connectivity. So you're going to have base level of maps. You're going to have a certain base level of voice recognition and all the other functions that can operate even when you don't have a cloud connection. That's going to have to be there on every car going forward, and it will be. And then that will be augmented by cloud connections. So companies like Nuance is probably the global leader in voice recognition systems.
Boston represent. Sorry.
Yep. Yeah. Well, they. Pretty much almost every manufacturer that has, voice recognition in their cars, uses technology from Nuance. It's there in almost every car today. Nuance over the years, they gobbled up all the other companies that were doing.
Right, they were Dragon and they bought a bunch.
There were a bunch of companies that all got absorbed into Nuance. So. And I've seen demos from Nuance, so they've got the built-in systems that that work on, the minimal hardware functionality that's in the vehicles. And then they've also got, they've got cloud-based systems, connected systems that they're building on top of that now, so that you can have, you can have digital assistants, things like Google Now and Siri, that are part of this. So it'll provide certain functionality in the vehicle even when you don't have a connection, and when you're in a place where you do have a connection, it provides enhanced functionality. It'll provide something more like natural language voice recognition. Instead of having to remember specific commands, you can just say, make a reservation for me at Grange Kitchen and Bar for 7 o'clock tonight for 2, and it'll do it. So those sorts of things are coming, in the next year or two, and they'll, because the vehicles are connected, it'll be able to provide updates to the functionality over time. As they make their algorithms more efficient, the part that's built into the car will also get better over time, and have more capability.
Okay, so that's the first part of it. Now, what do we do about drivers who can't drive when the system loses its mind? Right.
Yeah, well, I mean, a lot of them can't really drive today anyway.
That's true.
Well,
That's true.
and unfortunately, that's not likely to. That's a situation that's not likely to get better anytime soon. There doesn't seem to be any real, especially here in the U.S., there doesn't seem to be any real effort or desire to provide better driver training. So that, I think, and that's kind of why everybody's pushing so hard to move towards autonomy, so that we don't have to deal with that problem.
Yeah, well,
Technological solution to a human problem.
yeah. What was interesting to me was Jeff Sabatini, another former Autoblog colleague. He wrote something for Car and Driver about how the argument, and this has been my argument, was that better driver training makes better drivers, and he was saying not he whatever research he did said not necessarily actually, and maybe that's true. I just have I guess I have a hard time believing that better driver training doesn't create better drivers.
I don't think it can hurt.
Yeah.
Well, actually, well, I shouldn't say it's not.
Right, because that's true. Like you get
It actually it can hurt in some circumstances. Where if you've given drivers training, better training, sometimes they can become overconfident and get themselves into situations, drive too deep into a corner and get themselves into situations where they might have otherwise been a little more cautious or driven a little slower, and even if they crashed, maybe the consequences wouldn't have been as severe. And so now, as you get more and more, as people get trained better, they start to become overconfident and get themselves into situations that they might have previously avoided.
Yeah, and I don't know what the solution for that is, or even if there is a solution beyond experience. Like, when you learn to ride a bike, right, you just have to fall off. It's kind of the same thing, when you are learning to become a better driver, you just have to make mistakes, and our systems in cars right now are pretty good about saving us from our mistakes to a large degree. The amount of miles we drive right now is just crazy. It's trillions of miles.
Yeah, last year it was over 3.2 trillion miles in the U.S.
Yeah, and so the amount of accidents, 30,000 accidents a year, 30 to 40,000 fatal accidents a year is like that's a lot, but statistically it's very little, as a matter of fact. It's still 30, 40,000 people we'd like to still keep around. At least, some of them.
It's just over one fatality for every 100 million miles of driving.
Right. So
imagine that. I mean, in your lifetime, you're never going to drive anywhere close to 100 million miles. Unless you happen to be a long haul trucker, working for 50 years. But, more than likely, you will never come anywhere close to 100 million miles of driving in your entire lifetime. And, that's the probability that you will die in a car crash.
Right. I think you probably could win the lottery better than that.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, this is not something we're going to solve on the podcast. So we should move on, but it's just, infotainment systems are going to get better. and they're going to be better in a couple of different ways. I expect in the short term, we're going to see more adoption of let the phone, power a lot of that, because it has a pretty powerful processor, and really, we're not tying it into all the sensors and systems, and it should be okay. In the longer term and for higher end stuff, I'm expecting, like you say, a lot more sophistication, and deeper integration.
Yeah, I mean, we'll still be using, phones for connectivity for a variety of purposes, for a long time to come. But increasingly, the things that we're getting out of CarPlay and Android Auto are going to be built into the car, and so we're going to have to fall back on what the manufacturers provide us for an interface. But on the plus side, they do seem to be getting better at that. Mazda does a pretty good job. Ford's latest stuff is pretty good. GM's getting better at it. Everybody is to a large degree getting better at it.
Yeah. So we'll just hold our breath and keep praying for that one that's just like thinking, right? It just operates so intuitively.
All right. So
Yeah,
we got a couple of emails.
right. I was just gonna say we got some questions. We got some feedback. I like feedback. Feedback is good.
Yeah, and if you have any questions that you'd like Dan and I to discuss, you can reach us. There's a contact form on the website at wheelbearings.media, and or you can also just email us directly at wheelbearingscast@gmail.com. And the first one we've got is from James Becker, and he's asking about visibility. Looking at cars today versus one from the 80s, you notice that the glass area on new cars seems to be about half of the older ones. New cars are in general harder to see out of. And why is this? Is it style, crash standards, or something else? Basically,
Yes.
it's all of the
Right.
above.
Yeah, people feel, for whatever reason, people feel more secure when they are snuggled into this metal cocoon that they can't see out of. Personally, it feels like a coffin to me. I love visibility, lots of windows, but it also, the higher the side the metal comes up on the side, the easier it is to make it pass side impact. I'm assuming that's all correct.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. Having less glass area, more metal area, gives you more structure that can absorb. Especially now that they have side impact tests. They've got to crash the vehicle into a pole, sideways. So there's a lot of new crash tests that have been imposed over the last 30 years, that they have to protect the vehicle occupants and minimize the energy is transferred to the vehicle occupants. So that's got to go somewhere else. That's got to go into the vehicle structure somewhere. And so that's one of the main drivers for the reduced visibility. So that's why you have higher belt lines, and less glass area, and also thicker pillars.
Right.
Fortunately, in the last few years, probably in the last 4 or 5 years, um, as the engineers have started to figure out how to work with some new materials, to better work with some of the high strength steels and aluminum and other materials. They're starting to make some progress, moving back in the opposite direction. So through the last decade, we saw especially the A pillars on a lot of cars getting really, really thick and giving you big, huge blind spots to the front towards the front corners of the car. We're starting to see that move back in the other direction. So some of the more recent models have slimmer A pillars now, again, so you're getting some better visibility to the front and sides. Because they're using new materials that can give them the strength they need, without having to be really huge and boxy. Still got issues, especially to the back on a lot of cars. A lot of modern cars, have much higher deck lids, than they have in the past. Part of that is for aerodynamics. Part of that is just design and style. And of course, on utilities, even though you're sitting up higher, that does tend to hurt your visibility, especially around the back half of the vehicle. And so one of the ways they're getting around that is with backup cameras. That's one of the main reasons for having backup cameras on all the new cars.
Yeah, which I found myself every now and then like relying on the backup camera and then hating myself for it because I can back up with my mirrors, damn it. So I don't know. I'm in this existential place, I guess, where the what I know to be a real driver and what apparently automakers want to sell is they're diverging, and I'm not sure whether I should just jump into it. Um, I'll solve that.
Well, I mean, given the types of vehicles that we have available to us today, the reality is, no matter how well you use your mirrors, and having them set properly is also very important, especially your outside mirrors. Even if you use those correctly, there's still limitations on what you can see from those mirrors. Especially, for example, when you're backing out of a parking space in a parking lot, it's when you've got SUVs on either side of you, it's gonna, no matter what you're driving, it's gonna be hard to see if somebody's coming down the aisle. And your mirrors are not going to help you in that situation. And that's where a backup camera with a nice wide angle view, and also the cross traffic alert systems that increasingly have on vehicles, can be a huge help. To let so you can see visually on the camera display, but also, get alerts, as you start to back up, if someone's driving down the aisle, you'll the radar sensors will let you know that, hey, there's somebody there that you might not have seen, and you stop. So, I think, both are important. It's critical to use the visibility that you have, but also, given the reality of the situation with the cars that we have today, the cars and trucks we have, use the technology, to augment that.
Yeah, and that's just me being cranky, I suppose. Well, the other email
We love you.
right, of course. The other email we got it was a multi-part email, and we don't actually. It's about a lot of cars that I haven't really driven too many, if any, of them. But I certainly have opinions, so we can sling opinions with the best of them. So why don't we jump to that and then wrap the podcast and go eat turkey tomorrow?
Sure. Or depending on when you're listening to this, eat your leftovers.
Right, eat leftovers. Right.
Yeah. So Jonathan wrote asking, see, the first part was, how do you like the Porsche 718s with PDK? How about the Porsche 911 with the PDK? Dan, have you driven any recent Porsches with a PDK?
I have driven Porsches with the PDK. PDK is a good gearbox. I'm bored by it, even no matter how good it is, because or how quick it is. That kind of car, I just want to shift for myself.
I can't disagree with you. The PDK, for those not familiar with Porsche's branding, it's a dual clutch transmission. So it's an automatic transmission that uses a fairly complex gear mechanism inside to along with two clutches to shift gears. And I haven't personally driven the recent Porsches with PDK, but other recent vehicles I've driven with dual clutch transmissions, they've gotten a lot better. They're much smoother than they used to be, and they can shift remarkably quickly.
Yeah, it does. It will shift very
faster
fast
than a human usually can.
Right, but see, that's to me, like, the capability doesn't matter. Like, that's a spec sheet victory. Or if you're
if you're on a track going
Sure.
for fast lap times, it's a huge help.
So PDK, if you're on a track in a racing situation, PDK is actually quite an advantage because it can shift so quickly that it doesn't break the torque flow to the rear wheels. That means you don't put the car out of shape in the middle of a corner. You can shift, which you're not really, like, it's not advised to shift in the middle of a corner, but sometimes you got to do it, and PDK can do it without disrupting your traction because it doesn't really break the torque. Whereas if you had a manual, you definitely, there's no way to not break torque. So it has its advantages.
But having said that, like you, Dan, I actually like to drive,
right,
to take control of the vehicle. Not necessarily, if I'm commuting in traffic, into downtown Detroit or any other city, but when the road is wide open, I love to be able to take control and manually shift and work on that balance, between moving the shifter around, working the clutch pedal and the brake pedal and the accelerator. I enjoy that.
Right, and
enjoy the challenge of trying to get everything just right.
Right, and no plus minus button is going to do it. Like, that's not a stand-in. So that's that. And the 718 with the turbo engine probably is a lot more satisfying to drive, but I feel like it misses out on some of the I don't want to say purity, but just some of the character that made the Boxster,
Yeah. Well, actually, now that I think of it, I actually did very briefly drive a 718 Boxster just a couple of weeks ago at a Borg Warner event. I mean, it was only for about 10 minutes and at relatively low speeds. But actually, yeah, now that I recall that, the PDK actually, as automatic transmissions go, it's a fabulous gearbox. And I actually really like that four-cylinder, the flat four turbo that they have in there. It's a wonderful little engine, really torquey, and a lot of fun to drive.
All right, so there we go. Answer on that one. What's the rest of his?
Let's see. The next one, Camaro ZL1 with the 10-speed automatic, and that their GM is just starting to do some media drives with that. Neither of us have driven it yet. The 10-speed is the new transmission that GM jointly developed with Ford, and it's debuting right about now on the 2017 Ford F-150s, It's also going into Ford's new Super Duties. It'll be in the 2018 Mustangs. GM's going to be using it in a bunch of vehicles in their trucks and other rear-wheel drive applications, starting with the ZL1. Neither of us have driven either anything with that transmission or the ZL1, so it's hard to say. And for that matter, I haven't even driven the 6th generation Camaro yet. I'm still waiting to get into one of those. So I don't know about you, but don't really have much else to offer on that one.
No, and then we were talking earlier. GM cars are thin on the ground up here for the New England media fleet, so yeah, I haven't driven any of those. The last time I drove a 10-speed, it had Columbia on the stem, and it was a bicycle.
Yeah. So best pony car: Hellcat Challenger, Mustang GT350R, or Camaro ZL1. It depends on what you're looking for. I think the GT350R absolutely sounds the best. The Hellcat is probably going to get you down the quarter mile the fastest. ZL1 is probably the lightest. It'd be a toss up, probably a tough toss up between the GT350 or the ZL1. I think for a car to really drive on the road, the GT350R does have the advantage of being a manual transmission only. Whereas I'm not sure if they're even offering a manual on the new ZL1, are they? Do you know, Dan?
I do not know, but I can look at the Googles real quick. My thought was that the ZL1 is possibly the better all-around performer. That latest generation of Camaro just has turned out fantastically well in terms of just putting up the numbers and being well-rounded. But the Mustang is no slouch either.
Yeah. Well, and the the visceral experience of that flat plan crank V8 in the GT350 is just there's nothing like it. I mean, we talked a couple of weeks ago, about electric Ferraris and whether that's something that should really exist.
Yeah.
All the excuse you need, to justify an internal combustion engine is the sound of a flat plane crank V8.
Yeah. And so it does look like the ZL1 is available with a 6-speed manual or a 10-speed automatic.
Okay.
So yeah, I mean, I like the Camaro. I also like the Mustang. So, and I honestly, like, for me, yeah, those are the two ones. Like, those are the ones that are going to really be in the hunt performance wise. The Hellcat is only in the sort of competition because it has such crushing power. And it's a good handling car, but it's a big car. It doesn't have the precision.
For its size, it's surprisingly nimble for its size, but. Yeah, I mean, I would tend to go with one of the two smaller ones.
Yeah, I mean,
unless you're drag racing.
Well, that, or if I had to drive to LA from here today, or like you, if I had to drive to Pittsburgh,
yeah,
I would absolutely not turn down a Hellcat. That would be one of my top choices because it's got plenty of power for whenever you need it, and it's big enough to be comfortable. Yeah, and it still handles decently well. Like I really like the Challenger, but man, that car it's old, it's big, it's not efficient. Where the Mustang for sure and the Camaro have become much less pony cars and more like true sports coupes. Like they are better performers than they've ever been, and they are on dedicated platforms now that they don't share with some kind of economy car. Like for the Mustang's life up until, well, I mean, I guess up until the last generation, yeah. It was Falcon, Pinto, and Fairmont. And then the SN95, which was basically Fairmont with some more welds. and then the S197, that was really the first sort of dedicated Mustang platform. But even that used a lot of pieces from other parts bin stuff to make the cost savings. So really, now it's evolved past the point where it's an economy car in drag. And the Camaro is the same thing. The Camaro, while it shares its platform with other vehicles, they're all sort of high performers.
Cadillacs.
Yeah, they're
yeah, it shares its platform with Cadillacs, so that's not a bad thing.
Right. So those are the cars that are going to really be great all-around performers. The Hellcat's really fun, but it's kind of it's behind those two. So
okay, ZL1 or Z06?
Oh man,
or Corvette.
Corvette, because I mean, why not?
Yeah, I mean, if you're going to do that, yeah, might as well go all the way.
Yeah.
And at least you can see out of the back of a Corvette, which, for all the improvements on the latest generation Camaro, the visibility is still terrible.
That's crazy that you're saying that the visibility out of a Corvette is better than a Camaro. That's just
Yeah,
not right. It's
I know.
plain not
It
right.
doesn't seem like it should be,
No.
but it is.
So yeah, does that cover all of it? Is that all his
Let's
questions?
see. Any old car discussion on the rampant value of the 996 911? Sure.
The 996? Oh, that's the last air cooled, right? No, that's the
No, I
first.
think that was the first, like the mid 90s to early 2000s.
So those, if that's the first, that's the 996, right?
When they went from the old body, so they actually, I think they went air cooled in the 993, which was still like the original body style.
The 993 had the turbo had water cooled heads of that one. The 996 was the first water cooled 911. It shared a lot with the Boxster.
Yeah.
Yeah. Right. And people hated them, but they're still 911s. And while the cost cutting, you can really see the cost cutting in them, they're rising in value because they're affordable and they're still a 911. So that's like, if you want a 911, that's where you go, because the current ones are too expensive. The vintage ones are way too expensive.
They're basically, that's probably right now the most affordable generation of 911.
Yeah. They're no Super Carrera, but yeah, I mean, that's
do worse though.
Yeah, it's still going to be a real fun car, and you can find one that's well kept. It's like a Corvette in that sense. You can find one that's been very well kept for a good price, and it's going to deliver lots of driving thrills.
Yep.
So that's my thought on that. Go buy one.
Works for me.
All right, I think we've done it. I think we have killed another podcast as we go to kill a holiday jet. That just plain didn't work. But anyway.
Okay, just a few reminders. You can find the podcast at wheelbearings.media. You can find links to subscribe in whatever app of choice you want to use, whether it's iTunes or Pocket Casts or any other podcatcher app. You can contact us there. Send us an email. Send us your comments and questions. Give us a review in iTunes if you're so inclined. What else?
We're on Twitter now, at Wheelbearings Cast, WHLBRNGS Cast.
Right, no vowels.
Right.
Modern internet format, Wheelbearings Cast with no vowels.
Right, that's the cool kids do that. So yeah, we're there on Twitter now, and reach out to us in one of those channels. We're happy to do your supercar shootouts or answer actual questions about visibility or whatever else is on your mind. So until next time, we'll see everybody
next time.
Yeah.
See ya.
All right.
Have a good holiday.
Yeah, you too.
Owning a boat comes with a number of perks, like being able to fling your favorite fishing rod around. And here's another perk. Geico's boat insurance covers your boat and your belongings. And with specialist support from agents that are as passionate about boating as you are, there's so much value that you'll want to high-five someone. But not while you're holding your fishing rod. That's a prized possession. So hold on tight with both hands and keep it covered through boat insurance. Get more with Geico.